Hello, I'm Ken,
And I'm Yasmin. And
and
this is
this is
Conversations
Conversations
with
with
Ken
Ken
and
and Yasmin.
Yasmin. Barbara Kondratowicz is a distinguished teacher at a northern New Jersey high school. She has received recognition as a result of her work in academia through various programs, including the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill Presidential Scholars Teach Mentor Award, and was named the 2013 Co-Grand Marshal of the Garfield, New Jersey contingent to the Pulaski Day Parade. Barbara was also nominated for the Princeton University Distinguished Secondary School Teaching Award and has published lessons in Harvard University's Media and American Democracy Curriculum Compendium. Throughout her career in education, Barbara has raised student awareness of world issues such as human rights, engaged students in real world experiences outside the classroom through the Euro Challenge, and most notably through service learning projects that targeted Africa and Cambodia. Barbara's experience in international relations developed much earlier as a project coordinator for the U.S. Poland Chamber of Commerce, as well as studying abroad on a merit scholarship at Kansai University of Foreign Studies in Osaka, Japan. She has also received a grant through the John S. and James Knight Foundation to study at the Media and American Democracy Institute of Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Barbara holds master's degrees in international relations and secondary education from Boston University and Seton Hall University. She also holds an undergraduate degree in Asian Studies from Seton Hall University, where she earned title as Female Scholar Athlete of the Year, Big East Champion, and Big East Academic All-Star Team. And she's also my dear, dear friend and colleague. I'm so honored to have you with us, Barbara. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you
And
for
thank you,
having me.
Barbara.
I'm so honored to be here with you guys. I'm so excited. Thank you.
So, Barbara, since we're all educators here, the first question that popped into my head was why did you feel that you were drawn to social studies as a subject that you wanted to dedicate to your life teaching?
I think a lot of that, my desire to focus on history in particular, has been the result of growing up in a house with parents and grandparents, an extended family, because I lived with my grandparents my entire life, who really had a difficult life themselves. And I grew up hearing the stories of incredible survival from World War II. Also very, very difficult conditions that they lived under once the war had ended. My parents, who were born during the war, had lived under Soviet occupation. Poland, particularly in the area that they were from, had suffered tremendously. So it was really a life of poverty. And I never, as I got older and they told me more and more stories as a child, you would listen to them, and I was enthralled by some of the I guess, heroism to some degree, because the things that they did, I don't know if I would have the courage to do. And some of the things that they survived, I don't know how I would be able to survive some of those things. It's just, to me, that is what I think drew me to the art of history. Because I think, when I begin my courses at the beginning of the school year, I often reflect with the students on this concept of history. Why do we study history? Because it's his story or her story. We all have a story. We are who we are today because of our background, because of our experiences. And I think the influence of my parents and my grandparents, that really drew me to kind of focus on this historical background of what shaped me as a person. I can't change who I am because of what I experienced in my life, and what they experienced and what they passed down to me. And I've kind of raised my kids the same way. Everything that they've shared with me, I've kind of passed down from, holidays, the way we celebrate holidays, to what we, little traditions that we do even on a daily basis. And I think that's what it's just, I find it so fascinating that I am a product of that. And I find it fascinating when I speak to other people, and the way they act, the way they behave is often a reflection of their experiences and the way they were raised. And to me, that's always been very fascinating and very, I guess that's really what drew me to want to study history and also, reflect on that with others.
Do you also feel that your current students now kind of appreciate the nature of history, and basically as they're living through this historic time, thinking about how the past is kind of reflective of where their future could be, or even the moment that they're living in right now?
I think some do, and I don't think that has changed. I don't think it really is something that every student is very conscientious of. I mean, certainly, we're living through the pandemic. They've lived through the pandemic, and the nature of the way we live and behave today is a product of that. But I don't know how many of them are very reflective of their past, because I find that certainly some of my higher end classes, the students are much more aware of that. But my lower end classes, just getting the engagement of the students is difficult. But once you can make that personal connection for them, once you can find a niche, and I try to do that with every single lesson that I teach, I try to make it personal for them. If you can find that personal niche, then it draws the student not only into the lesson, but perhaps gets them to reflect on what is happening around them, and how the events of today, again, are very connected to a series of events that led to where we are right now, in this moment, in this time. And it's every single one of us. It's not just from a political perspective. It's not just from, it's even in a very intimate and personal way. Our behavior, our actions are reflective of so many things that have happened in our past. So I try to reiterate that almost in every lesson that I teach. And, it really clicks with a lot of students. And I'm hoping, I hope that it continues in that direction in the future, and as I get older, I find that things are becoming a little bit more challenging, because their world is very much a digital world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of them spend time just talking to their parents. Right. I am surprised by the number of students who really don't know much about their grandparents or their great-grandparents. To me, that was always very interesting, but I find that more and more students know less and less about their own history, but I also think that's because they're spending less and less time talking to their parents, whether it's because they're engaged in computer games, or, perhaps in sports, but also in the last few years, I'm finding that less and less students are actually engaged in sports. Mm. They're more and more engaged in things that are, perhaps video games or competitive video games, where they're competing against other young people or older people that are in a different part of the world, which is interesting.
Do you feel that your students are kind of being able to embrace how European history affects the development of where America is, or do they view it as just two separate entities altogether?
I think that's the challenge of the subject matter that I teach, because it is my job to create that connection for them, to create that understanding, how there, I emphasize that there is this old world and the new world. We're still considered part of the new world. So, we are a product of the events that took place in the old world. They often have difficulty, because I think the fact that I teach freshmen predominantly, that connection, they're 14-year-olds, right? So everything is foreign, everything is old to them, everything is, for a 14-year-old to make that connection, it is very challenging. I think by the time I get them as seniors, they're 17, 18, some are even 19 years old, that understanding is very different. It's much more profound. It's much more obviously very intellectual by that point.
Right.
You know, they've already, that the 4 or 5 years for an adolescent makes such a significant difference in their understanding of history and the connection between different events. And sometimes they don't have that aha moment until they are 17 or 18, you know, you know, again, it's so challenging for a 14 or 15-year-old to make any connections, even sometimes with American history.
Sure.
You know, I think because they are still children. So the challenge is for us, all of us as educators, is to try to build that bridge for them, try to create that personal connection so that the lesson is meaningful. You know, not only meaningful from a political or historical perspective, but also personally meaningful for them. And that's, you know, that's something that I enjoy, I find challenging. And I think, you know, as educators, I think it's, you know, one of the wonderful things about this profession.
There's a current trend when it comes to reevaluating history through our own eyes, in which right now, not to say that they're rewriting history, but they're unearthing uncomfortable truths about some of our historic figures and being able to adjust that to what's happening in the classroom. And I'll just use Abraham Lincoln as a perfect example. When people start doing more investigation into why Abraham Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation and basically understanding where he was as far as a product of his time, seeing how that emotional reaction happens when it comes to teaching students. Like basically the history that we were told as a child is now changing because there's more information coming out. Do you feel that those elements of truth should be adjusted to the current state of where students are right now?
Oh, absolutely. I think the whole story should be told. You know, I think ultimately none of us also are perfect. You know, and I think it's really important to shed light on those facts when we're teaching about anybody in history. You know, and I think that's the beauty of the amount of information that we have today. And one of the things that I like to emphasize for my students is always check the source. You know, because the source is so important to ensure that the information that you're getting is actually factual. And I think even saying that, you know, I think everybody's questioning even facts today, you know, but
Right.
I like to emphasize to my students that, you know, nobody was perfect. I think, you know, ultimately we have to look at the positive things the individual did, and also understand that perhaps they made some mistakes in their lives, but let's look at where this has brought us.
Right.
You know, and I always say to make advancements, you know, even in our own personal lives, to progress takes so long to make those achievements, those jumps, and you can take steps backward in an instant.
Right.
And that's what I think is so challenging and terrifying, and what we've witnessed in the last year, where you know, I think we're all reevaluating not only history but also our own lives and the decisions that we make and the way we view people and what we say and how we behave. I think it's, you know, it's been so profound in the last year, and you know, and I want to mention something that I think is that I probably wanted to say a little bit earlier when Yasmine was reading my bio. And I thought about this, you know, particularly in the last couple of years, I think I've noticed being in the classroom that the anxiety and the stress amongst the children that I teach is very reflective of the anxiety and the stress that the adults in the lives of these children have been facing, and what has increased even before the pandemic. And it really made a profound impact on my own life, where I began to kind of pull back perhaps a little bit more in my profession, not in teaching, but perhaps in many of the activities that I was doing in addition to teaching.
Right.
I wanted to spend a little bit more time focusing on my own kids, because I noticed that their anxiety levels were increasing, because and legitimately so, because the pressure is increasing. the pressure is increasing on all of us. So, I just felt that I needed to kind of be a little bit more attuned to what was happening in their lives.
Sure.
And perhaps it was a lot of self-sacrifice, but to me, it was worth it.
Definitely. I taught college for several years, and I also was a tutor for elementary school kids for English as a second language. I was also an after-school enrichment instructor. And a lot of times what I realized is I remember during Trump's first run for presidency and also the second one when he actually became president, that a lot of the conversations that the parents were having where they didn't think their kids were paying attention started to reflect in the work that they wanted to create in my after-school enrichment classes during this point in time in which parents are spending a lot more time with their children. Basically, what are the things that you feel that you have learned about your children during this time?
I think they want to be heard. I think children, like adults, need to be heard and want to be understood. They want to be validated, just like adults. I have been fortunate enough that I think, I really tried to build that line of communication from the time that they were little. And the teenage years are the most difficult years. I have 3 children. I have a almost 23-year-old, a 20-year-old, and an almost 14-year-old. And even the gap, there is a generational gap between the older children and my youngest. But ever since they were little, I tried to build a line of communication. But as they became teenagers, their friends become more important than their parents to some degree. So the influences that I tried to ensure that I created or I surrounded them by very positive influences. And, even in their activities, I think that's also important. And maybe I kept my children even too busy sometimes, but I think that line of communication, I was always, as we ran from and we're still running from activity to activity with the youngest one, we always make an effort. Is everything okay? What's going on? Being aware, where are you going? Who are you with? Even with my adult children, and perhaps it may be too much, but my husband says that you worry too much. And I said, well, I'm a mom, I'm like, you don't worry enough, and we kind of meet somewhere in between. But I always ask him, where are you? What time can I expect you home? Just because, it gives me a little bit of sense of security to know that they're safe. And that line of getting back to the line of communication, I think you need to have all conversations with your kids, even some uncomfortable conversations, obviously age appropriate. As they get older, you have to be brazen enough or brave enough to address difficult conversations so that you open a line of communication so your children perhaps will be more comfortable to come to you if they have a problem. And I'm not saying to be friends with your child, but because you need to be a parent. You need to also be able to listen and not yell. And that's coming from someone that sometimes yells a lot at her own kids. But I have a lot of understanding. I tell my students that I'm nicer to them sometimes than I am to my own kids, because I think my patience for my own kids, I just expect a lot more, from my own children, because I've spent so much time talking and saying, one of the things that I reinforce is think about the consequences of your actions. Try to make good choices. Mom and dad have given you a foundation. We've been giving you the tools all of your life. And, think before you speak, think before you act, try to think about the possible consequences, but at the same time, take responsible risks in everything that you do. And that's been ever since they were little, ever since they were born, ever since, and again, it's not easy. It's a lot of self-sacrifice. It's a lot of time. And unfortunately, I think in today's day and age, parents have less and less time, although the pandemic forced that time, because we were we were trapped together, almost too much. But my husband and I laughed because for a couple of months, we had more time with our kids than we've had in a long time. All sports were canceled. Classes were online. So we would sit down and eat our meals together, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all of us, despite the fact that the older children were significantly older now and they're adults basically.
Right.
But we would sit down at the dinner table, have dinner together. We talk about our day. We talk about what happened. And that was something that we weren't able to do for a little while. We were over on the weekends, but during the school week, it was impossible between practice here, practice there, who's coming home when, who had to go to work, pick up, drop off. But the pandemic allowed us to reevaluate that and probably have a little bit more time together to have these discussions. And that I think is the toughest thing for any parent, especially as the kids reach those teenage years, because the kids don't want to talk to their parents. The parents know nothing, oh, what do you know what's going on? You don't understand, and maybe sometimes we don't understand, but I think it's because that communication gap needs to be bridged.
Sure.
And the hope is that by the time they're the 14, 15, 16-year-olds, you've instilled enough tools for your children so that they pick good friends because they become who their friends are. Right. And I think, would you say that would be something that you experienced in your own life? If you think back to growing up, my sense is just having watched the two of you, have during your show, I think we've had positive influences in our lives. Yeah. Would you say that is the case? Or am I wrong when I say that we are who our friends are? We are who, the way our parents have raised us, our parents have given us good tools.
Right. We're definitely reflections of definitely our parents. One of my favorite writing exercises I used to give to my students was write the courtship of your parents. Write the courtship of the parents, and basically having them lock in and try and think about their parents as these two individuals young falling in love with the difficulties that might have happened at that point in time, and watching people struggle with it. And I have a couple of students that really just dove in and say, if you don't know the story, create it. Think about how these people came together to create you. And it's one of those things about during this time, knowing how I've talked to my parents, at least, once a week. I try and call them once a week because they're in Atlanta, I'm out here in Los Angeles, and trying to keep in contact with them as much as possible. But I think about moments in which the way I start handling problems. Sometimes I handle them the way my mom would do it, and sometimes I handle the way my dad would do it, and how each one of them, had this huge influence in my own development, especially my emotional makeup, which is the thing that I've noticed during this time of isolation and stress. I stopped going to the point of panic, being able to relax in the moment and trust in the guidance that they gave me to do the right thing. Without the distractions that I would normally have of, any type of artistic project that I could dive into so I wouldn't have to think about what I was going on. It's been basically me and being able to reflect upon that a lot. What I've been doing a lot is helping some of the teachers that I know create their online courses. Some of them using Canvas and then using Blackboard, and helping them go through step by step and seeing the amount of stress it caused for them, because now you've got these teachers on this technology learning curve that they've got to actually perform and also connect with their students. And did you find the implementation of more technology difficult, or were you able to actually move into it a little bit more smoothly as far as teaching?
I think initially it was very challenging because it was unexpected. And I think our profession is so personal, particularly again, I'm a high school teacher, that moving to Google, we use Google Classroom. Moving to Google Classroom this year. Last year we had all asynchronous learning assignments. And it wasn't until the beginning of this year where we began to have synchronous learning. And I found it initially overwhelming. But once I learned a few tools that I was able to master, and again, being fortunate to have young people at home that are so, technologically savvy, it was very helpful for me to go to, for example, my oldest son, who does a lot of presentations. He actually runs review sessions at his academic institution for various engineering classes. So I said to him, I'm like, I need your help. I need to record myself. How can I do this, without, I was having difficulty with Screencastify, which is what a lot of teachers use, because it wasn't allowing me to stop, take a breath, and because it wasn't very easy at the time, because I had to retrain myself. But I had plenty of PowerPoints that I was able to, that I had already created for earlier lessons that I was able to voice over. He taught me how to voice over, and it was so useful and so perfect last year that it really enhanced that whole environment, and the kids really enjoyed it. They would write to me. They're like, you finally learned, this is great, because this is what we wanted, because initially the asynchronous assignments left them on their own. It was like, read this, answer these questions. So they really craved that interpersonal experience, which was funny because I'm obviously a talker. I like to talk. I think that's the art of our profession as educators. We are storytellers, particularly history teachers are storytellers. And, I would love to have conversations, ironically, with my students. And that when we lost that, they, by the time April came, they were like, I really miss this, can we do something different? What's a way where we could, have a conversation? So I did various, I can't think of the word right now, the little group discussions online where they were chatting back and forth. What's the word for that? It totally escaped me. They would post, I would require them to comment on someone's post. And then they would have to put their opinion into a post. And I happen to be one of the writers that I like to use a lot of excerpts from, but in particular, one excerpt is Shooting an Elephant by Eric Blair or George Orwell. He is one of my favorite writers, particularly from the perspective of 1984 and Animal Farm, but Shooting an Elephant isn't his most popular piece, but it's such a powerful piece. And I normally like to do Socratic circles, which are very, engaging. And the students are able to not only share their opinion, but analyze the piece and make connections between earlier pieces that we've read. And they miss that. So I had them kind of have this chat online, but they still miss the personal experience. And I think, the beauty of Google Meets is, and obviously Zoom has really opened up a whole new world for educators. It's just another tool that we've been able to use. And so now I think I'm pretty savvy. I think the challenges are getting the kids engaged, and particularly those that aren't motivated, trying to motivate them in this environment is significantly more challenging. They need to be in school.
Yeah, because I can't imagine. I was talking to one of my friends who's teaching high school, and I was telling him when I would have my lesson plan, sometimes I would adjust them just for the emotional mood of the class for that day, and being able to adjust to see like where everybody is, still being able to hit the points that I want to do, but maybe the style of what I was going to say, or a certain image or a certain story that I wanted to relay, I would adjust based on the mood of the class. And it's really hard, nearly impossible to do that when it's digital.
Yes.
To really make those connections. Because is there something beautiful about when you're saying something in the middle of the lecture and you see that like imaginary light bulb go off in a kid's head? And that joy that you get from like, they understand it now, and being able to do that, it just seems like, even though we've gained some things as far as basically integrate this with technology so maybe you can reach more people, that feeling of being lost from those emotional and personal connections, I think is going to be something that's going to be challenging with this past year about regaining that.
Yes, I totally agree. You mentioned light bulbs. I literally look at light bulbs because I'm looking at their ceiling fans.
Mm, yeah.
So many of them do not. I'm looking at foreheads. So yesterday I did a Socratic circle, and I said to them, I'm like, nobody wants to talk to your ceiling fan, guys.
Mhm.
You have to show your face.
Yeah.
And I think some still choose not to show just like their eyebrows or the top of their head. And I don't push it because, I know they're a little bit anxious. But something interesting happened last weekend. Yasmine knows this. I ran into 5 of my students at a soccer match. They happened to be playing my daughter's team. And I knew 4 of the students because one of the students, actually 3 of the students show their face. One never shows her face. And this one kept she ran up to the gate and she's waving to me. I had no idea who she was. And I was trying to figure it out. I was to some degree embarrassed because I was trying to think maybe she is one of my, that I've seen actually show at least part of her face. So when we were up in the stands, all separated, it's all outside. I approached a parent and I asked, what is the student's name? And I said, oh my goodness, I've never actually seen her face because the student never showed her face. But what a different impression she gave in the personal setting. And I find that really amazing. Now that some of the students are coming in, it's an interesting connection because they say, well, gosh, I didn't realize how tall you were. That's what they say. And I'm like, wow, I didn't realize how tall you were, so it's kind of fun. And some of the students I don't recognize because again, I've never seen their face because I'm looking at light bulbs and ultimately, and then Yasmine knows this, I've been saying from the very beginning that they need to be in school. And even with the risks, I think, we need to find a solution to get them all back. Because while maybe in this setting, we're adults, even in my honors classes, my strong classes, I think some of them need to come back. Some function very well in this setting because they are disciplined, they are motivated. And this setting has allowed them to have, a little bit more free time, perhaps for scheduling extracurricular activities. So they become even more productive.
Okay.
But I think ultimately that lack of personal connection is what really scares me because they need to see how others behave, be in that presence to actually witness it, to see both good behavior and bad behavior. Because they need to be a judge of what is appropriate and what's inappropriate. And sometimes you can't really judge that unless you've experienced it, if you've witnessed it yourself. So I'm hoping, as worried as I've been about going back to school, the more time I spend in school, the more I feel comfortable, if that makes sense to you, because I'm getting more comfortable to, with the students, I'm learning, okay, leave your windows open, keep your 6 feet apart. I can't do the things that I used to do. Some of the interactive activities, particularly when I teach, we do a passbook activity when we teach South Africa and the policy of apartheid. And we take it to a whole new level. And I realized that I can't do that. Even though I thought I would be able to do it, we really try to impose restrictions to really give that simulation, to really make it a simulation. We impose restrictions on them. Like you can only sit in one part of the cafeteria. You can only, you have to respond to me as yes, ma'am, when you see me, and you have to have your passbook. When I stop you, if I find you, you have to have your passbook. But that, now they're sitting behind glass. I realize, or at least plexiglass. I'm behind plexiglass and I feel like a prisoner already, and they feel like prisoners. They can't even see me in the classroom sometimes. And I find that very frustrating, but we're getting used to it. They're learning how to cope with it. And I'm hoping that, within the next couple of months, we find a solution that, obviously that we get over this pandemic, or at least learn to deal with it, learn to live with it, and find a solution where we can regain some of that personal, interactive, those personal and interactive lessons, which really are so important to their own growth, own intellectual development. And I just hope it's soon. I don't think it's going to be this academic year, but they need it. They need it.
And do you think that the new CDC regulations, when they just came out yesterday, might be helpful? I know that they basically changed the distance from 6 feet to 3 feet. They're basically not recommending the barriers within the classroom. Almost kind of like a medium step towards that normal feeling of the classroom.
Ken, just clarification, the CDC, is that middle school, elementary, the 3 feet? Is that
It's K through 12.
It's K through 12?
K through 12, yes.
I wasn't sure. Okay.
I have to be on, I have to see how I'm going to feel, because I think I have physically larger students than the elementary school teachers. And I think one of the things that we've experienced at the high school level is that the 10th and the 11th grade, there aren't many students coming in. But my classes are relatively large. I teach the 14-year-olds are coming in. And then anybody who teaches seniors, the seniors are coming in because it's their last hoopla, right? They want to be with their friends. They're excited to get back. And I have to say, the one class that I have that's relatively larger, it's a little bit stuffy. It's nice to have him back. But now with the 3 feet, I have to see what it's, I haven't experienced it yet.
Right.
It somewhat concerns me because COVID is still real. COVID is still, I know that my daughter's basketball team, for example, had an issue with COVID. The entire team, my daughter hasn't been going because she had a knee injury. So luckily, we weren't exposed. But to me, that it's still kind of scary because as a teacher, you're confined in this small space. We are the older ones. We are more likely to deal with the repercussions of COVID versus a younger person who, might be just we might just be carriers, but there's so many educators who have underlying health conditions that I think with the new CDC guidelines, even though it is the science, they're going to be scared and they're going to be uncomfortable. But as time progresses and as these changes come in, just like now, I've become very comfortable with my classroom. So I think it's just going to take a little bit of time. And it may also have a profound effect on whether parents decide to send their children back. Because I've had students in the past that have serious underlying medical conditions. And the one thing I have to say about this environment is that it allows those children an even playing field. It allows them that opportunity to still participate and get the same experience as the children that, again, the virtual environment allows those children to have the same experience as the children that have been coming in. It just evens that playing field. So, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. So I'm wondering if they'll move our desks when we come back, Yasmine, whether Monday will be a very different day.
I want to speak to what Barbara was saying about having the students come in, especially students who are struggling. There are parents who want to help their children at home, but don't feel that they have the tools to give that support. Maybe it's a second language learning issue, or they just don't feel confident because I find that high school has gotten a little more difficult every year. The content is more challenging, the assessments are more challenging. And so for those struggling learners, maybe it would behoove them if they are feeling safe, if there are, medical conditions that allow them to come to school, so they can get that personal connection and support. Because I think there are parents who feel like they want to do their best, but people are working, or they just feel that I don't have the tools. I don't know how to help. How many times have we heard that? Right? I don't know how to help my child.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Very sad.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is. It is. I think it's also very interesting in terms of the 3 feet. I think every school district, as you said, Yasmine, will most likely reevaluate the way they have set up their classrooms.
Mm.
Again, it's very interesting. At the high school level, there are less kids coming in
Yeah.
than there are at the elementary school level.
Yeah.
And it's some of the things that I have found amongst my own students is that the kids that are struggling really should be coming in, but a lot of parents have chosen not to send them in. And I'm not really quite sure why. And perhaps it is because, they fear that the child will contract COVID, or at least, bring it home, be a carrier and bring it home. But I have found that a lot of the higher end students, those students that are, that are motivated learners, have used this as an opportunity to engage in other extracurricular activities. So many of them have taken on, college level courses. They like this setting and are choosing not to come in because they're able to, multitask and take multiple classes. So it's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be a clear difference between what we see at the high school and what we see at the elementary school.
Both
I
of you.
think it is especially important for the elementary schools to have the children coming in.
Yeah.
So the 3 feet, that's going to be key. I think for us, because we have bigger bodies and more confined rooms, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And I don't know how it's going to affect us because, again, there are a lot of parents that are choosing not to send their kids to school.
Are there student athletes? Question is for both of you. Do you know if there are student athletes? I think I read an article where they are choosing to stay remote, high school athletes, so that they could perform as athletes, and that would, to
Yes.
kind of protect that. That's true. That's what.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's absolutely true.
Why? Because it would keep them fit for their games.
Right. It would keep them fit for
recruiters.
their game. A lot choose to do that because they see an opportunity for recruitment, possibly, right? So they want to maintain their physical fitness, and they see, maybe things will change because now that the statistics show that schools happen to be some of the safest places to be. I mean, and that seems to be coming across the board, that the spread of the virus in schools has been relatively limited. And it appears that, schools, again, are some of the safest places to be. So I wonder if that'll shift in the second half of this academic year versus what we saw last year. Because, although, I'm sorry, I mean last 2020. So it's the first half of this academic year. But we're in the second half of the academic year, but first half of 2021. But what we saw in the fall, for example, a lot of parents chose to keep their children home. And I mean, we weren't necessarily in school, but there were a lot of school districts that were actually open. But parents chose to leave their student athletes home because, they wanted to make sure that their athlete didn't get sick, because they wanted to keep going to training. They didn't want to get other team members sick.
I just heard of a district in New Jersey where parents are advocating for a 5th year of high school so that they could play and that they could be seen, because they feel that the past year was not a time for them to showcase their talents to recruiters, and perhaps next year would be better. And so they want to have a 5th year. What do you think of that, Ken?
I think it's probably necessary. And the main reason that I feel that is it's going to be very difficult to figure out how much damage this has created.
I'm asking you two because you were both high school athletes, from my understanding. Is that correct? You were both.
Yes, yeah. I did track and wrestling.
Okay, so that's why I'm asking you both about the 5th year.
I think that all depends individually on, the student as well. I mean, like for me, it was like knowing that while I was wrestling, I stopped wrestling in 11th grade, but I ran track until I was a senior. But for me, it wasn't, I wasn't looking towards doing sports in college. A lot of that had to do with because I got the acting scholarship. But it was one of those things that if it was something that you really, really needed, I think you should allow the students to be eligible for it, because that can make a world of difference towards a student's educational and emotional development, to have that extra year where they can actually be seen by the right people. Because the amazing thing about having that right person that sees you, that recruits you to a program that will change your life, and have that be limited by people that can get to you only because they physically can due to these limitations. I think that having that extra year of eligibility is going to be a lifesaver. I mean, it's not going to make up for the lost year that we had, but I think it's very important. It's like the same thing, even if you were like people that are on artist scholarships, if you're doing theater and something and not having performances, like not having the International Thespian Festival, which is where I was seen to get my acting scholarship. I think it should not just be for athletes, but for all students that are doing anything that is extracurricular activities, so they can be seen by the right people.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree. I mean, I know of parents that have been actively shifting their children to another school to have them repeat a year in an effort to make sure that they are mentally and physically grown to be able to get that athletic scholarship. I never did it personally. Actually, you know, it's so funny. I had no intention of running in college. It was over the summer between high school and my freshman year in college that the coach had contacted me and said, you know, you're coming here. Why aren't you running? And I said, I'm done with running. I don't want to run anymore. The pressure was a lot, and it was a lot of anxiety. And you know what's so funny? Listening to what you just said, Yasmine, and I think about my parents who had no understanding. I was a child of immigrant parents. I was an only child. They had no understanding of the whole college process here in the United States. They had no understanding of the athletic process. And maybe perhaps I would do the same thing. I have never held my kids back. One of my children is actually my second son is a very young junior in college, and he is a college athlete. I probably could have held him back, but I never did, because I felt like academically, ultimately, he's going to school not to play sports, but for his academic performance. And I think, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if our priorities are in the right order. You know, I think that, you know, your education is something that no one can ever take away from you. And if, especially in this environment, if an entire school district makes that decision, I think that's a wonderful decision, because it will help so many young people who can mature intellectually and physically. And when I think back to my own parents who had no understanding, like they wouldn't have even thought about that. They would have been like, oh, I don't understand. You just got to go to school. Go, go, go. You know, I think it'll open up doors for parents that probably don't even understand that is a possibility, or if that is a necessity, if that makes sense. I think I don't know. It's just so difficult raising kids today, and you're always hoping that you're making the right decisions, but you never know. You know, it's always a test. You don't know until after, Oh, that was the right thing to do. Oh, that was not the right thing to do. But I think, we're always trying to hope to make those right decisions, but there is no real formula, and that I think is the challenge. And the pandemic has certainly thrown a wrench into everything that has applied in the past. And certainly, technological development and the era of artificial intelligence has certainly thrown a wrench into parenting, because not only are young people influenced by the friends that they surround themselves with, but they're also more influenced by social media and what they're exposed to. And sometimes that's not necessarily a good influence.
You just reminded me what else has been missed by young people this year, the study abroad experiences. And
Yes.
when you talked about, positive influences in Ken's life and yours, in your life and my life. I mean, if I'm thinking about it, Ken, your parents supported you traveling throughout Europe as a very young person, working as a musician. They didn't hold you back. They didn't say you're not going. Barbara, you lived in Japan for a year as a very young person. Studying on your own. I mean, I didn't have a study abroad experience, but in my early to mid 20s, I worked in other countries, and I don't think you can do that now. It would be very difficult. You had those experiences. No one held you back. They supported those decisions, and I think that also contributed to your professional and personal lives. It did so for mine, and now our
Well,
young people won't have that right now.
I
Right
know,
now,
yeah, I know for me, like those 3 months that I spent in Europe with that graduate level jazz band probably had a bigger influence on me because it was the summer between high school and college.
you were
And I
so
think about
young.
the experiences that I had about, and that was the one thing that I kind of like locked into my head about having conversations with kids my age about the deep um, political divides and development of America, where I was having conversations that I would know there's no way I would have had these with American students. About the idea of what it was like as a person of color growing up in America, and basically understanding the laws and breaking down specifically about how our government works. And it was just this amazing conversation about this just devouring, American history and having these conversations from wanting to know what was like a personal connection of growing up in America as a person of color. And I think about, that whole period of being lost, about not being able to travel, not spending time with other cultures and people that are different from you, that have had different experiences that actually will influence you to be a more open and well-rounded person. Having 2 years of that, is going to end up extending that because it's going to be a while before we can get to that point where we can do it again. But it was so influential in basically who I am.
Was that one of the greatest experiences of your life? And I know you've had wonderful opportunities and experiences, but Ken, was that one of the top 5, you would say, in your life?
You mean after meeting you?
Oh,
Oh,
that's so sweet.
my
No,
dearest friend.
I would definitely say that because the thing about it was, that year, being able to see some of the jazz greats play, being able to sit in with some of the jazz greats before they died, um, really influenced, a lot of me embracing the moment that I have now. Getting a chance to see Sarah Vaughan, Miles Davis live, at that time, and being able to play with some legends that I'd always wanted to meet before they passed away. And I can't think about what it was like to have missed those opportunities. See these people that are respected so much, these people whose music I basically learned how to play my instruments on. And being able to sit down and go like, hey, you want to jam with me? Yeah, I want to jam with you because I don't know if I'm ever going to get this chance again. But it's those moments of influence. Getting a chance, to be in Amsterdam and going to the Van Gogh Museum and then basically being in Copenhagen and then Sonnenberg, Denmark. I think about all those things. The time that we started that little jazz trio, we got chased by the police in Paris because we were playing, on the street making money. I mean, those experiences, I think about how much that influences my worldview, even though I grew up, in Atlanta and had a lot of international friends. There was nothing like being there. It was nothing like having those experiences.
And your parents did not hold you back when
No.
they said go. And Barbara, you too. Your parents wanted you to go. You had that opportunity to study so far away. You were so young.
I totally concur with what Ken said. I think having traveled abroad, I went my junior year of college and I had to redshirt a season because I was an athlete at that time. And it was the best experience of my life. It was so enriching. I grew not only did I learn a lot about Japanese culture and Japanese history, but I learned a lot about myself. So I have to agree with Ken. I think I matured. I think I realized how different I was, not only as I felt really American, if this is going to sound odd, but growing up in a bicultural household, I never felt fully American, nor do I feel fully Polish, if that makes sense. I'm kind of like, I have 1 foot in the door, of both, because I'm so influenced by both cultures. Amongst Poles, I'm seen as an American. Amongst Americans, I'm seen as a Pole. So it's kind of interesting. But having gone to Japan, it was such an enriching experience. And I realized really at that moment how American I was in the way I behaved and the way I spoke. And I think it was the way I carried myself, and the friends and the people that I befriended, which came from all over the world, Australians, a friend of mine that was French actually. And she really opened my eyes to saying, oh, you know what, you really are American in the way you behave and the way you view the world. And I'm like, well, what's that? They're like, well, you guys tend to be very open. And I thought that was interesting, because I never perceived us as being very open to things. But that was the perception that they had of me. And I always said, that experience taught me how to, I guess, embrace things that maybe I was uncomfortable with because the culture was so different. And the food was very different. I wasn't just eating sushi, but I was eating different types of sushi and things of that nature. And I think it really opened up my world. And it was so important. And it's so important for young people to have those experiences. And it's not just travel, but to actually live there and be immersed in the culture, be immersed amongst the people. It is so influential, and it really enriches one's life and mindset and thinking. And I'm saddened by the fact there are so many people that lost that opportunity, so many students that lost that opportunity to be enriched. And I hope soon it opens up. I hope, again, I have a strange suspicion that maybe by the fall, a lot of my friends who have college age children, their children are planning on leaving already. They have like paperwork done and things of that nature for the summer, to spend the summer abroad. So I think some places are going to allow it.
One of my first teaching experiences was teaching English and drama at an American school in Switzerland. And that was a tremendous eye opener. And now they are not, thank God I had that experience, because now, because of the pandemic, they're only hiring European Union passport holders. And also another experience was when I worked in Bosnia and volunteered in Bosnia and the Republic of Georgia. I didn't have a cell phone, it was the 90s. And, it's like, I didn't have anything, and no one thought about these things. It was a different time. There was so much, we felt a freedom that, we don't have anymore. And I also think at that time period for you two traveling and living abroad, it was the early 90s. We're all the same age. It wasn't study abroad, working. It wasn't the big entity it is now, the big business of it. So I don't think a lot of people did it. And you probably were one of the few people who you knew in your circle who was actually doing something like this.
I literally, if it wasn't for my jazz band instructor basically saying like, we need people to play because I don't think everybody can make the trip. So would you like to sit in? I'm like 18 years old, playing with a graduate level jazz band. I'm like, yeah, I can audition. And then the next thing I was playing first trombone. I'm like, well, I guess I'm going. It was that, but it was like, looking for those opportunities that, but I know the one thing that probably helped me the most is being over there for those 3 months adjusted the way that I taught my international students when I was teaching college, especially when it came to story structure. Like the amount of students that I had from Korea, Japan, and China, and basically understanding that they have been fed, American story structure without anybody going like, well, let's talk about your cultural story structure and see if we can make that work for you. Because that's what you're connected to. Don't try and force yourself into this box right now and make that connect. And it was about sitting back and listening to the stories when I was in Europe. And sometimes, having, because, kids, when they find, oh, there's Americans staying with us, let's let them hang out with grandpa. They don't speak any English for a couple of hours while we go hang out. Let's see what he can do. A lot of things about talking to, having to communicate with somebody when you don't speak their language. But being respectful and being able to listen and pay attention. Those experiences, and then still being friends with some of the people that I stayed with over there, 30 plus years later. It's amazing.
I do think, you said something very interesting that it just brings me back to my time in Japan and how challenging it was, because I spoke a little bit of Japanese. I was studying Japanese, but the miscommunication sometimes, the challenge of having to survive in a climate where you don't speak the language. And I think it really opened my eyes to perhaps my parents' world. When they came to the United States, they didn't speak a word of English, and they survived and they stayed here. And I think it really is, again, I grew as a person. It taught me different ways to communicate, the value of being able to communicate with someone, the importance of being able to communicate. Do you think, that, and as you guys were speaking, I was thinking about the changes in the past year, particularly in our field of education. What do you think are the most profound changes that will likely stay as a result of this virtual learning environment? What do you think will likely stick around now for a long time?
Well, I definitely think that the technology of basically being able to do the online classes is definitely going to stay. I don't think it'll be like more of a hybrid where it's a combination of in-person learning and also doing it online. I think that's going to become a standard, not just because of its being effective, but I also think that's when school districts realize that they can save as much money as they can do by, having the classes being started that way. And that's pretty much going to be here to stay.
I think there's a bit of a wall up in what you were discussing earlier about breaking that wall and making the human connection again. I think it's going to take some time. I think we could do it, but I think it's going to take time to get people to feel comfortable to be able to communicate person to person in contact and build those relationships again. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it will take some time.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I'm worried for the young people who really need that interpersonal connection and nurturing, and the loss has been in the last year has been so profound. And one of the things that I worry about for my youngest child is, again, those important life experiences of interacting with other individuals and adults and children alike. And again, witnessing good behavior, and also perhaps seeing some bad behavior in an effort to kind of teach them, well, maybe that's not right. They need to see that. And I think that this environment has created such a barrier. So I'm hoping that we will be back in person fully by next year, at least by next year.
I hope so too.
Yeah. So I think the one thing that has been running around in my head is dealing with this lost academic year that we've had. Basically trying to figure out where we can be hopeful for what those students lost during that time. How do you think that we can actually kind of mitigate the circumstances of them losing that much, especially from an emotional and mental state, as far as, not allowing this year so much to really affect them in such a negative way in the future?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because, again, these are uncharted waters. I think from an academic perspective, and again, I speak for myself, and I know I probably speak for Yasmine. We have worked so hard as educators to ensure that they do not lose anything academic.
That's how I feel.
Absolutely.
Quality education. Yeah.
I have never worked harder in my life than I have in this year. And I am physically and mentally exhausted from, trying to come up with lessons to ensure that my students are not missing out on anything that the students that I taught in the past couple of years have had. I try to create the same structure. I try to be very innovative in forcing them to challenge themselves as well. But what I've noticed is that, again, this has opened up doors for very motivated students, because they're able to multitask, and they're able to do, they're able to not only engage in class, but they're able to pick up other activities that maybe they wouldn't have normally been able to do in the confines of the school day.
And shy students.
Yes, and shy students, right? It's very interesting, because
Very confident.
the kids that have come into school, I've even said to them, I'm like, you're different in school than you are at home. For some kids, the virtual environment has really opened up new doors, because they've engaged in class. They may not necessarily be speaking in class, but they're participating via the chat. So, as educators, we've had to kind of juggle, like, we're looking at 25 kids or actually 25 ceiling fans sometimes. And then trying to read the chat, and then trying to find it, are they all engaged? What are they doing? But what I've also noticed is the students that are perhaps need a little bit more coaxing to be involved in the class, or involved in their academics, there's a greater gap. And that's who I'm most concerned about. I don't know if we can ever gain that back. In terms of, I'm always challenged by, again, another aspect that I think has become, I don't want to call it a burden, because I don't think that's the appropriate word, because I think we've always been kind of like their parent outside of their home. I think there's more and more being asked of educators. And I think I was trained to be a history teacher. I love being a history teacher, and I don't mind listening to their concerns. I don't mind. I love when they come after school and they say, hey, look, I need some advice. Can you help me out with this? I don't know what to do, my friend. And I'm so happy to be able to be part of that and to assist, in any way that I can. But I think the challenges that we are going to be faced with are so profound, because we know that depression is up. We know that anxiety is up. And again, we have to, as adults, be healthy to create a healthy environment for our children and our students. And I don't know how we're going to be able to do that. And, every year it just seems more and more difficult. And more is being asked of the schools. But there are certain things that we cannot fix in the school, and some of that has to take place at home. And that gap is growing greater and greater between those that have the support network. And honestly, it takes a village to raise a child. That old, wives' tale or proverb, it's so true and so profound, I think, of every culture in the world. Even in my own house, my children, knock on wood, have been relatively successful, but that's because I have an entire village to help me raise them. I have parents, my own parents, my in-laws, my husband, we're all involved, and it's not easy. And sometimes we struggle, but we try to work together to move them forward, but not every child has that.
No.
And that's been the greatest challenge for mental health workers. How do you provide that, or who's going to provide that? That leaves us with the schools. The only place that can actually provide the mental health or the mental counseling that they need. But those challenges are becoming greater, because can the school systems actually do that when some of that needs to also be reinforced at home? So I don't know what the answer is. And I don't know if we're going to be able to find a solution soon enough. And
I think education is going to take a different, is evolving into that role, Barbara and Ken. I think that's it's not where, people went into it. This is your subject major, and this is your content, and this is how you execute it, and this is how you assess it. It's becoming a more comprehensive role. And I don't know how they're going to prepare the next generation of educators to take on that role, because as you said, it does take a village, and there needs to be a lot of participation.
Yeah, this environment, the virtual environment, has made it very difficult for educators to identify the students that need assistance.
Help, yeah.
Mhm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's what's, we've lost a year. And I think that is going to pose significant challenges because now, again, where a teacher can sometimes pick up on something being wrong at
Yeah.
home because behavioral problems are usually the product of depression and anxiety and other factors happening perhaps outside of the school system. And we can't pick up on that when everybody has their mic off and we can't see them. And the scary thing is I've had some of these students since September, and I don't know what some of them look like.
Hmm.
And that's very scary to me because sometimes you may not be able to see it in their behavior, but perhaps it's in the way they appear, even in the conversations that they have with other students and or their interactions with other students, because you have, I think our profession is so exhausting because you're 100% on. From the moment the kids enter the classroom, you are observant of what, you're trying to at least be observant of everything that's going on in front of you, as well as, perform on the stage because it is a performance. And that's going to be challenging and difficult. And I don't know if the school systems are ready to be able to handle that situation.
What do you think you miss the most about not having students physically inside the classroom?
I think that emotional connection that I have to the students, being able to read their faces, being able to build a relationship. And I feel like I haven't been able to build a relationship with them in this environment. Some of them, yes, because some of them have reached out to me for extra help. But they have to be, those are students that advocate for themselves. And I've tried to reach out to the students that I think are really struggling. But it's those in between. There's a lot in between that I haven't been able to build a personal relationship with. And that's what I really, really miss the most, because that's why I'm in this profession. It's not so much, I really do love this job. It is it's very challenging and very difficult and you have to be on 100% of the time. I know I said that earlier, but honestly, like you have to be able to adjust. You have to something goes wrong. You have to be able to reassess the situation immediately and move forward, whether it's a behavioral issue or something of that nature, and I miss that. I miss the challenge of that. Obviously the virtual environment has created other issues that I've learned to shift and cope with, but I really, really miss that interpersonal connection that I was able to develop in the classroom that doesn't exist in the virtual environment. How about you, Yasmine?
The same. That personal connection and seeing the students interact with each other. Actually, that's what I would miss mostly. It's not always about having them interact with me, but because having them interact with each other and seeing friendships develop. That's what I would be in.
What techniques have you done to keep yourself in a more mentally positive state during this time?
I find that the one thing that has always been significant in my life to relieving stress is to run. I run, I get fresh air and sunlight. And Yasmine knows this. I always say, like, when we're having a tough day, just stick your face out the window, get some sunlight on your face, get some fresh air. I find that to this day, I used to run about 100 miles a week. I know that's crazy, but that was in college. And I still run 2 to 3 miles a day.
Okay.
And I do it not so much for physical fitness per se, but I do it for mental health. I find that it is a release. And even if I can't run, which is very rare because I try to squeeze it in, I'll put dinner in the oven. I'll be like, I'll be right back. I got to run my 2 miles because I figure I can do my 2 miles in less than 15 minutes. And it just gives me a release. And that has been instrumental for my own mental sanity throughout all of this. And, even listening to music, even listening, just to find a few brief moments to take a breather, of fresh air, whether it is to walk outside or to, take a quick walk around the block in between classes. Well, actually in between, I say I don't have enough time in between classes, but during lunch when I was completely virtual, that's what I just take a quick, brief walk around the block just to get some fresh air for my own mental sanity.
It's really saved me during this pandemic, creative opportunities. This program with Ken that was born out of the time of Black Lives Matter at the beginning of the pandemic, the political upheaval. I need to do something. Let's do something together, and we created this. Also, as a playwright, having being more creative and seeing my work in theaters and working with theaters in Jerusalem and a festival in Canada recently, all Zoom, but it's all creative work and publications and actually being more creative than I've been in a long time. So creativity for me. Thank you, Barbara. This has been
thank you, Barbara. This has been a great
show.
Definitely.
Thank you so much
You're a
for
great
having
guest.
me. I'm so honored to be a part of your conversations.
You are great.
And,
thank you.
And I really appreciate it. It's nice to and I think this is what we need. We need interaction with others. And this is what a lot of the young people lack.
Yeah.
Because they don't have this. They don't even know how to create it. So, and I've seen it amongst some of my children's friends, particularly the older children, the college age kids. They are struggling because they are not doing things that perhaps we did when we were younger. They're not even going out for hikes. They're not, they don't even know how to organize that because they never did it. So I think the depression is really, and the anxiety is something that we're going to have to face for a long time. And I don't know how quickly we will, I mean, slowly we are recovering, but I worry about these young people, and they are our next generation. So hopefully there'll be a solution soon.
Until next time. I'll do this like, hi. Hi, I'm Ken.